Missouri Governor Mike Parson signed a new law called the Second Amendment Preservation Act into law Saturday afternoon.
Especially in the statutes where if you go to the courts and you can get if somebody's incompetent, you can get a court order to take their weapons away from them.
Amendments 67 and 93 would prohibit the IRS from buying and storing firearms and ammunition.
That is simply an accessory like any other accessory that goes with the firearm, and for the government to tell us that we can't have.
You can take their weapons on that, and that's part of the bill that was passed.
Missouri Arm Law Revival. The recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to decline revival of a Missouri law known as the Second Amendment Preservation Act has sparked significant legal and political debates surrounding arms rights, federalism, and the role of state versus federal law. The law, crafted by Republicans in Missouri, aimed to nullify certain federal arm restrictions perceived to infringe upon Second Amendment rights enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. However, its legality came under scrutiny, ultimately leading to a federal judge's ruling invalidating the law, a decision upheld by the Supreme Court's recent refusal to intervene. At the heart of this legal battle is the complex interplay between state and federal authority, as well as the fundamental right to bear arms guaranteed by the Second Amendment. The Missouri law, signed by Republican Governor Mike Parson, sought to shield state and local officials from enforcing specific federal arm regulations, including those related to taxes, arms sales, and restrictions on arm possession for individuals with certain criminal backgrounds.
Missouri Governor Mike Parson signed a new law called the Second Amendment Preservation Act into law Saturday afternoon.
You can take their weapons on that, and that's part of the bill that was passed.
Critics say if it flies in the face of the current wave of gun violence by working against federal gun control.
Especially in the statutes where if you go to the courts and you can get if somebody's incompetent, you can get a court order to take their weapons away from them.
At the end of the day, we're protecting Missourians' rights that were guaranteed in the Constitution.
It represented a concerted effort by Missouri lawmakers to assert state sovereignty over armed regulations and challenge what they viewed as federal overreach. However, the Biden administration swiftly challenged the law in court, arguing that it violated the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which establishes federal law as the supreme law of the land, overriding conflicting state laws. From the administration's perspective, the Missouri law not only encroached upon the federal government's authority to regulate arms, but also posed potential risks to public safety by undermining established federal arms regulations. In rejecting the plea to revive the Missouri law, the Supreme Court effectively upheld the principle of federal supremacy while also affirming the federal government's prerogative to regulate arms. This decision aligns with long-standing legal precedent emphasizing the supremacy of federal law in areas where it conflicts with state statutes. By declining to intervene, the court avoided endorsing a state law that could potentially undermine the uniformity and coherence of national arms regulations. However, the court's decision was not without dissent. Conservative Justice Clarence Thomas expressed his disagreement, indicating his support for reinstating the Missouri law. Thomas's stance underscores the ongoing ideological divide within the court regarding the balance of powers between the federal government and states, particularly concerning issues such as arm rights. Beyond the legal ramifications, the Missouri case reflects broader societal debates surrounding arm control, states' rights, and constitutional interpretation. It highlights the tension between advocates of stricter arm regulations who argue for robust federal oversight to address public safety concerns and proponents of arm rights who champion state autonomy and individual freedoms enshrined in the Second Amendment. The Supreme Court's decision not to revive the Missouri law marks a significant development in the ongoing discourse over arms regulations in the United States. While reaffirming the supremacy of federal law, The ruling underscores the enduring complexities and contentiousness surrounding Second Amendment jurisprudence and the delicate balance between state and federal authority in the realm of armed rights. Second Amendment battle. The legal battle surrounding Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act underscores the ongoing tension between states and federal authority in the realm of arms regulation. Crafted by the Republican-controlled state legislature, the law aimed to nullify certain federal arm restrictions perceived as infringing upon Second Amendment rights. However, its implementation faced significant legal challenges and ultimately resulted in the federal judge's ruling invalidating the law, a decision upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court's recent refusal to intervene. The Missouri law imposed hefty fines on state and local officials for enforcing federal arm laws deemed unconstitutional by the state legislature. This aggressive stance reflected the deeply held belief among some lawmakers that states should have the authority to override federal regulations they view as encroaching upon individual liberties, particularly those enshrined in the Second Amendment. However, the Biden administration swiftly challenged the law, arguing that it violated the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which establishes federal law as the supreme law of the land. The administration contended that the Missouri law not only impeded the federal government's ability to enforce arms regulations, but also jeopardized public safety by undermining established federal laws designed to protect citizens.
Those firearms are not allowed for purchase in the United States today. So
Unelected gun-grabbing bureaucrats who are hell-bent on branding law-abiding gun owners as criminals.
Don't have a selector switch for 3-round bursts or fully auto. This is a semi-automatic handgun.
Amendments 67 and 93 would prohibit the IRS from buying and storing firearms and ammunition.
Arm rights, deeply entrenched in American culture and history, are fiercely defended by many as fundamental to individual freedom and self-defense. However, the country also grapples with high levels of arms violence, including numerous mass shootings, prompting calls for stricter arm regulations from some quarters. President Joe Biden, along with many Democrats, has been vocal in his support for arms restrictions, characterizing armed violence as a national embarrassment. Conversely, most Republicans oppose such measures, arguing that they infringe upon Second Amendment rights without effectively addressing the root causes of armed violence. The legal showdown over Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act eliminates the complex interplay between state and federal authority, as well as the ongoing debate over arm rights and arm control in the United States. While the Supreme Court's decision reinforces the supremacy of federal law, the broader societal discourse surrounding arms regulation continues to evolve, shaped by competing visions of liberty, security, and public safety. Constitutional arms debate. With a conservative majority, the U.S. Supreme Court has significantly shaped Second Amendment jurisprudence through a series of landmarks rulings since 2008. Notably, in 2022, the court expanded upon previous interpretations by affirming an individual's right to carry a hand-arm in public for self-defense. This decision marked a pivotal moment in defining the scope of Second Amendment protections, particularly regarding the right to bear arms beyond the confines of one's home. The court's forthcoming consideration of a major arm case in its current term underscores the ongoing evolution of Second Amendment doctrine. Scheduled for arguments on November 7th, this case will scrutinize a federal law aimed at restricting arm possession among individuals subject to domestic violence restraining orders. At stake is the balance between public safety concerns and constitutional protections of arm ownership. The court's 6-3 conservative majority suggests a predisposition towards a broad interpretation of Second Amendment rights, which could influence the outcome of the pending case. Previous rulings, including those in 2008 and subsequent years have consistently affirmed an individual's right to possess arms for self-defense purposes, emphasizing the fundamental nature of this constitutional liberty. Critics argue that an expansive view of Second Amendment rights risks undermining efforts to curb armed violence, particularly in cases involving domestic misuse. They contend that arms restrictions in such circumstances are essential for safeguarding vulnerable individuals and preventing further harm. Conversely, proponents of armed rights assert that any encroachment upon Second Amendment freedoms must be scrutinized carefully to ensure compliance with constitutional principles.
That is simply an accessory like any other accessory that goes with the firearm, and for the government to tell us that we can't
purchase that. It's illegal. It is not a weapon of war. A weapon of war has a fully automatic switch or a 3-round burst.
Unaccountable bureaucrats who are invested in keeping themselves employed by continuing to regulate products.
Expects they will continue to work closely with federal law enforcement in regard to gun crimes. Got a final check of the forecast next.
The Supreme Court's decision in the upcoming case will have significant implications for armed policy nationwide, potentially setting precedents for future legislation and legal challenges. The outcome will not only shape the enforcement of existing armed regulations, but also inform ongoing debates surrounding arm control and individual liberties. Overall, the Supreme Court's recent and forthcoming rulings on Second Amendment cases reflect the complexities of balancing constitutional rights with public safety imperatives. As the court navigates these issues, its decisions carry profound implications for the interpretation and applications of the Second Amendment in contemporary society. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.